So, all right, so you have the creation, you have the fall, and then you have the flood narrative in there, which is kind of where we left off. But we're still not done with what you would call kind of the intro to really the Bible. The entire Bible, the intro is found in Genesis chapters 1 through 11, leading up to how it is that God is going to fix things. So, if you start, let's look in chapter 10, Genesis chapter 10. And in chapter 10, we start getting these genealogies, more genealogies, right? What's interesting, though, is what is kind of missing from these genealogies. Yeah, right? All right, you don't see the words, and he died, over and over and over, like we did in chapter 5. Remember, we said that was something unique to chapter 5. The genealogy of death. It's hammering in the fact sin is in the world, and now death is in the world. And he died, and he died. Now we're getting to general genealogies at this point. By the way, chapter 10, verse 1, if we were doing our detailed study through Genesis, particularly Genesis 1 through 11, we would really talk about this phrase, these are the generations of, because you see this phrase repeated multiple times, especially in the beginning portions of Genesis, and then leading on. It's kind of one of those phrases that's thrown out to say, hey, we're kind of starting another section now. These are the generations of, if you ever hear me say or use the word, because I'm not thinking about it, toledot, that's what this is, a toledot. This was just, it's what it's called. It's a funny word because that's what that sounds like in Hebrew, and so people just call them the toledots. So this is a toledot. These are the generations of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so in verse 2, he starts going through the lineage of Japheth. Verse 6, the sons of Ham. And then in verse 21, who does he start looking at? All right, Shem. And by the way, you might hear me say shame sometimes, because technically that's how you pronounce it, shame. But shame just sounds really weird to us in English because the English word shame has a very negative connotation that this doesn't have at all. So if you hear me say shame, I mean Shem. All right, so shame is what it is. What's really interesting is that our genealogies are not yet finished, because when you look in chapter 11 and verse 10, how does that start off? All right, these are the generations of, does that phrase sound familiar? What do they call that? Toledot, yes. Kelly's our vocab man. He knows all of the vocabulary for all of this stuff. Yeah, so you have that repeated. These are the genealogies of, and yet, who's the one that's talked about here? Shem, right? And so you have to ask this question. You have a genealogy of Shem, right? In chapter 10, starting 10:21 and following. And then you have another genealogy of Shem, starting here in, 11:10 and following. Is that surprising to anybody else? Do we need to have a genealogy of Shem twice? Apparently, yeah. When you see something like this, you should immediately start to say, what's going on here? This is bizarre. This is weird. Why do we have a doubling up of Shem's genealogy? So, yes, these are rhetorical questions at the moment, but if you want to answer, go for it.
Okay. Well, they're showing generations at this point and years of life.
Okay.
So they would be putting timeline, what it seems to be.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You have a kind of, it's a going back to chapter 5 and the way that the genealogies in chapter 5 gave the years, with them in the same kind of a way. So, yes, there definitely is a difference. You have the Toledot right there. These are the generations of, so that's different. So, yeah, something's going on. But let me suggest that there might be something else, because you have a genealogy of Shem right here. You have a genealogy of Shem right here. What's in the middle of the genealogy of Shem sandwich? Ryan? All right. You have between them the Tower of Babel. Let's talk about that. Let's get into looking at the incident of the Tower of Babel. So, chapter 10. Chapter 11 and verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there, confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. All right. How many of y'all have heard this story before? Okay, so a couple of you were relatively familiar with what's taking place here. The people had one language. They were there together, and they were migrating. That is, they are spreading out. They find a place in Shinar, and they settle. And then verse 3, "Come, let us make bricks, burn them thoroughly." So they're starting the construction. They're figuring it out. And then you get to verse 4. "Let us build ourselves a city, a tower with its top in the heavens, and make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth." This is the real issue right here. This is the problem. What is at stake in the narrative of the Tower of Babel? First of all, what's so wrong about building buildings? How many of y'all have ever built a building before? Yeah? I mean, Richard's livelihood is kind of built around building buildings, right? So what is the deal? Kelly, did you have some thoughts here?
They didn't want to do what God told them to do.
Okay. All right. So Kelly is taking away all of my buildup that I had prepared here for us to think and to consider over what's wrong with this. Why, Kelly? What is it that God told them to do?
Told them to multiply and fill the earth.
Yeah, the command that's given for them in Genesis, all the way back, Genesis chapter 2, be fruitful, multiply, really chapter 1, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, right? They're supposed to disperse. They're supposed to spread out. They're supposed to rule and subdue the earth instead what are they doing? All right, instead, they're congregating. Now, you may say, well, okay, so maybe they might just be settling near each other. What's the big deal about that? What's their attitude in their congregating?
It's the exact opposite of what you were just saying God had told them to do.
Okay.
It's saying,
Okay, hold on. If you've got more, wait for the mic, because otherwise I'm never going to be able to repeat it all. So
Sorry.
for the folks at home, go ahead.
otherwise, it's the exact, what they say is the exact opposite of what you just said God told them to do. It says, or else we will be scattered across the whole earth.
Yeah, exactly. Are we having issues, by the way? Okay. All right, y'all got it though? Oh, all right. So, okay. All right, we'll move on then. So hopefully you folks at home will be okay. All right. So just as Eddie was just saying, it isn't so much the fact that they congregate, but that they have an attitude in doing this that says, we know what God told us to do, and we're going to do the opposite. We know what God has said, but we reject that in order to do differently. This is, in other words, congregating as just like the man who went out and gathered sticks on the Sabbath. Anybody remember what it said about the man who gathered sticks on the Sabbath? What's that? I'm sorry? Yes, but remember, the laws that came right after that story talk about people who do things with a what? Anybody remember? With a high hand, with a defiant attitude, with a fist in the air that says, I don't care what you say, God. In fact, I'm going to do the exact opposite because I can. That's the attitude right here. That's what makes this story so bad. It's not that they built something. It's that they said, we know what you want us to do, God, and we don't care. In fact, we want to do the exact opposite because they want to do what? Yeah, Cliff? All right. All right, that is exactly it. What Cliff just said, they wanted to make a name. I'm trying to figure out where I want to put this. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Let us build a what? Well, what does it say? Tower. It says, come, let's see here. Come, let us build for us a city, a tower. Keep on going with. Okay, with its top in the heavens. What does that mean? I'm sorry? Okay, a big tall building? Yeah, I think it goes a little deeper than just a really tall building, though. Yeah, what they say is, let us build a building that will go all the way up to the table where God sits. And let's sit down at the table with him. God thinks he's all big and bad up there. Here we are. We can make bricks. We can put them together. We can build a building. God thinks he's everything. No, we can make a name for ourselves. We can make a name that's going to be great, so great that we will be able to go up and sit down at God's table as equals with him. You see that? Let's build a city with a tower that goes all the way into the heavens. Let's show God that he's not greater than us. What's the very next thing that it says? Well, okay, yes. But verse 5, what does it say? All right. Don't miss this picture. right? I mean, it's like you've got God up in the heavens, right? And they are building their tower in order to reach the heavens, but what's God doing? God who's in the heavens is like, what? What are they doing down there? It looks like those little ants are trying to put some pebbles together or something. What? Man, it is so tiny and so small and so just minuscule, I can't even tell what it is from where I am. I have to go down in order to get a better look to see it. Can you see the way this is described? That here they're building this tower, the city with the tower, to make a great name and saying, look at this great thing that we've done. We're going to sit with God in the heavens. And God is like, yeah, what is that tiny little thing down there? Can you see the picture, the contrast here? That the Lord had to come down in order to see what it is that they're doing. By the way, you're supposed to chuckle at this. You're supposed to see a little humor. That their great thing they thought was so grand is actually so small compared to God that he has to get closer to get a view of it. Does God literally have to come closer to get a view of it? No. It's a picture, right? It's just demonstrating a point for us to see this picture. So the Lord comes down in order to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. You get to verse 6, and there are different ways to understand what's going on in verse 6. The Lord said, well, look, behold, they are one people, they have one language, and this is the beginning of what they will do. Nothing they propose to do now will be impossible for them. How do you take this? How do you understand this verse? Anybody have any thoughts on this? Okay, Dale over here, Kelly, has a thought. Go ahead, Dale.
They will look at their accomplishment and think there's nothing we can't do. We don't need God.
Yeah, okay. All right, very good. So one of the viewpoints that you see is that God is describing the attitude of man, right? When he says, behold, they're one people, and they have one language, this is the beginning of what they will do, or this is the beginning of what they will think that they are able to do, and they will believe that nothing that they propose from now on will be impossible for them. Therefore, what are they going to do? Okay, they're going to continue to reject God to do what they want to do. All right, so very good. Dale hits on one of the ways to understand this is to see this is the projection of the way that the people think. Now, there is the very literal way of looking at this and reading it, that God is actually saying, wow, now that they've built a city, they can do anything. Does that kind of fit, though, the rest of what you find here? I really don't think that that's the case. I don't think that God is just saying, wow, I'm going to accept the fact that they are now on a level where nothing is impossible for them. Because remember, we just looked at the verse where he had to come down in order to see their great accomplishment that they had made. So I don't think a literal reading makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, Ryan?
Chris, I wonder, does this verse translate well, or do you know? Have you looked into that? Because the way it's written in English, it kind of seems like, and I don't believe this to be so, but at first glance, like God underestimated them, and and I don't, like I said, I don't believe God ever underestimates anything.
Right.
Because he knows his creation. but it kind of, well, at first glance, that's the first thing that popped in my head.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. A very literal reading of this. I like the way that you worded that. It seems as if God is saying, wow, we underestimated these people. Who knows what they're going to be capable of? We had better thwart that. And yeah, I'm with you, Ryan. It doesn't sit well. No, I have not translated through this section of Genesis to take a look at how convoluted that might or might not be. But just remember, when you are reading through Scripture, there is simply, I haven't used these words in a while, so let's see if y'all actually remember some of them. There's the locution, remember, which is simply the words on the page, right? That's all that it is. And then the next two, I might get them mixed up because I sometimes get them mixed up. But I think the illocution is what the author intended for you to understand by the words on the page. And sometimes those two things are different, that you can pick it up and read it, and like Ryan is saying, well, look at this, it looks as if God is saying, wow, I underestimated just how powerful these people are. Man, I made a mistake. But I'm with Ryan. I don't think that's what's going on at all. So the illocution is going to be something different, which is why Dale provided an alternative understanding that he is actually talking about the way that man sees himself. And these are, he's saying now man is going to believe that he can do anything, and that would cause him, as Josie said, to reject God at this point and not lean on God, not look to God, but to say, I can do my own thing. And so, Jan up here, Kelly. And so it is important to realize that even as we read the same words, there are different ways of understanding them. Go ahead, Jan.
I'm thinking about where we're at, and we've just seen sin in all the world, and we started over with the flood, and now they're starting to band together, and we're getting to sin, and we're not starting over, but he's going to spread them out.
Yes. Yep. That is exactly what's at stake right now. Is after the flood, and I mentioned earlier Genesis, he reiterated with Noah in chapter 9, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That's what they're supposed to be doing, and that is running up against now people who, with a high hand before God, are rejecting God's command to spread out, fill the earth. And instead, they're saying, we're going to congregate right here, and we're going to take our place in the heavens and make a great name for ourselves to sit down with God at God's table. I mean, that's ultimately what it is that they're trying to do with this tower. And so God has to come down to see them, to look at it, and he says, all right. Another, by the way, option is to read this with maybe a little sarcasm involved, which doesn't actually land very far from what Dale was saying, the way that that is seeing humans and how humans would understand themselves. But God's saying, whoa, look at these people. Look at this. They're going to be able to accomplish anything now. I mean, they already made themselves a tower that goes all the way to the heavens, right? Just think what they'll be able to accomplish with this. But it ends up in the same place. Just as Josie said earlier, it ends up with the people who are rejecting God, rejecting God's commands, God's laws, and they are rebellious with a high hand before God. So, what does God do? All right, he confuses their language, causes them to, in some way, and there's no way, we don't have any more details, any more understanding about what this is, and how it came about, or whatever the case is. We know that language is an evolutionary type of thing anyway, that every language evolves in various ways, but he does something here. Kelly?
So God lived through this before the flood. with man version, could this be his way of just protecting man because he said he would not going to destroy them again? Mm-hmm. And says, no, I'm not going to let you get as far as you did the last time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely that to it. This, and if I can kind of take what you're saying and move forward with it, is this not an act of grace on God's part? An act of mercy on his part, where he does confound their languages to disperse them so that they do fulfill what they're supposed to fulfill. Their high hand comes down at this point. They don't try to stay there and continue with this city and this tower, which is going to reach into the heavens. They dispersed from that point over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, what was its name? All right, therefore its name is Babel, which kind of sounds, apparently, from my footnote, I don't know, I don't have that vocabulary term in my head, but it theoretically kind of sounds like the word for confusion in the Hebrew language, or confused. So that's tied to that in some way. Because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth. So we have Babel, which is eventually going to be known by what?
Babylon.
All right, Babylon. This is kind of the beginnings of what is eventually going to be the great enemy of God and of God's people. The place where they take a stand and they build themselves a monument that's going to go up into the heavens to take their seat with God is the place that eventually, what's going to happen? Yeah, I know, that was an open question. There's a lot of things that are going to happen with Babel, right? Anybody remember what happens in Daniel chapter 2? Did someone say it and I just missed it? Okay, you have that great statue. Remember the dream with the statue, the image of the statue, which had, the head of gold and the chest, the arms of silver, the belly of thigh of bronze, and then you have the legs that are made out of iron. What was that statue? What did it represent? All right, the nations which are going to span from Rome to when? From Babylon to, Rome? Yeah, from Babylon to Rome. All of them continuously part of a single entity. It is a single entity. From Babylon all the way to Rome, it's a single statue that spans that entire time, that is set up as Babylon the Great, the enemy of God's people. It's talked about not only in Daniel, but I think that's what the language in Revelation is all about. As you see Rome as Babylon the Great, it's again a single entity that runs throughout really the ultimately the end of the Bible. The great enemy of God's people is Babel, which starts right here. The first time that you really have people banding together, putting their hands in the air, saying, I know what you want us to do, God. I don't care. I'm doing something different. All right, questions on Babel? Nobody? Nobody has at least one question that hasn't yet been answered? John, are you able to read my mind? Okay, hold on. Wait for the mic here. Although if it's not the question I'm looking for, I might ignore it.
There you go. From this time, when they were scattered to the time of Abraham, which is at the end of Shem's second, how many years? That's the question. How many years?
Oh,
From the time of them scattered into the time of Abraham, it comes on the scene.
Oh, I'm not certain. I mean, you could add up, all of those years, look at them, and things like that. I don't really try to put dates to things that are in front of Abraham. It's not that important. Abraham, we can put around the 2100, 2200.
That would be affecting that prophecy in Daniel.
Yes.
Later on. It would answer all the promises that Adam and Eve were given about their sons becoming national entities later on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody else know what I'm talking about?
Well, but you do see, and it's not just, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, it's not just God at work, but it's humanity at work.
God had a different plan and purpose for them to do something so he could have his plan laid out. And if they stayed in that one place, that wasn't going to happen.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is a discussion, I'm going to curve it now, okay. But this is a discussion that we'll have when we study prophets, and we start looking at a lot of the things in the prophets, because this fits in that discussion, I think, a little bit better. Here's a question that nobody has asked. John got actually pretty close in the beginning. What does Babel have to do with Shem? Remember I said when we began that you have Shem, a genealogy of Shem, the story of Babel, and then a genealogy of Shem once again. And so you have kind of this Shem sandwich going on, and Babel's the meat in the middle, right? So what does Babel have to do with Shem? Here's the payoff, and unfortunately, this is one of those moments where you will hear me say a lot, you don't need to know and to understand the original languages in order to get and understand the Bible, right? What we have here is fantastic. You don't need the original languages. Unfortunately, in this story, it helps quite a bit. Because the word Shem, the name Shem is actually a common word in the Hebrew language. Shem means name. The word for name is Shem. And so when the people build a tower, a city and a tower, what was their purpose again? We want to make a what? A what? A Shem. The people are saying, we want to make a Shem for ourselves. We want to put our Shem in the world that's going to affect it and is going to change the world the way that we want to see the world changed. And then God comes in and says, no. You're not going to make a Shem for yourself. In fact, what? What's God done? He's already made one. He's already put his name, his Shem, in the world. And he accents it by not only giving the genealogy of name once, but he gives the genealogy of name. Then he tells the story about how man wants to make their name, and God says, no, you're not, and stops it. And then he says, and here is the genealogy of name once again. I'm just going to hammer it into you. You don't get to make the name. I already made it. You don't get to affect the end of the story with the name that you create, because I'm going to affect the end of the story with the name I create and that I put in there and how it is going to be lived out. And as you follow the genealogy going into chapter 12, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, from your kindred, from your father's house to the land that I will show you, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your what? I will make your Shem great, so that you will be a blessing. Can you see it right there in the promises that are given to Abraham? After the people said, we want to make our Shem, and God says, no. I've already got the Shem that I want, and it's not you. I'm going to do this through Abram. I'm going to make his Shem great. And not only is his Shem going to be great, but it is going to go down a path and ultimately lead to a place where his name, God's name, truly will be great. And where does that end up? Where does God's great name, Shem, finally enter the scene? This one's not a trick question. Jesus, the name above all names. The name, at whose name, right? What's going to happen?
Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord.
All right. At his Shem, the God's Shem that he places in the world, he will have the Shem that's above every Shem, so that at the Shem of Jesus, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess Jesus is Lord. For those on the earth, above the earth, under the earth, everybody. Can you see how important the contrast in the Tower of Babel story is? That right here at the very beginning, they say, we're going to make a Shem for ourselves. And God says, no. I've already got that covered. In fact, I had that prepared before the foundations of the world were even created. This is my Shem. Does that make sense? All right, questions or comments on any of that? Jen, was that a hand up or was that okay, just, all right. That's pretty neat, isn't it? To see right here in the very beginning. And so I want to move into then chapter 12. And what we're going to enter into, and I just read part of it, but there are what I call, and a lot of people call, 5 key passages in the Old Testament. That is 5 key passages that carry the story from, creation all the way through. The first one we've already talked about is Genesis chapter 3. What happens in Genesis 3? All right, sin, or another word that's often used, even though it's actually not in the text, the fall. So this is often called the fall narrative. Now we're getting to number 2, which is Genesis chapter 12. Now we know that we're in a new section because up in chapter 11, in verse 27, how does that read? How does it start? What's that? All right, these are the generations of, right? What's that called again? A toledot. Yes, very good. All right, so in chapter 11, verse 27, these are the generations of Abram, right? Is that what you have? Probably not. What's your say, the genealogy, or the generations of? All right, Terah. Who's Terah?
Abram's dad.
All right, so Abram's father. And sometimes you see the text do this where it's going to introduce the main player, but it doesn't make them these are the generations of. I can't give you a good reason why that is the case sometimes, but that's what's taking place here. Terah is now introduced, who fathered Abram, Nahor, Haran. And so, at this point, Let's see here. Terah, verse 31, Terah took Abram, his son, Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son, Abram's wife, and they went together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years old, and Terah died in Haran. So, let's see here. If we just kind of put a little map right here. Not that Israel exists at this point in time necessarily, but you have here Israel, you have the spot over here. And keep in mind, when I'm drawing freehand, don't take anything to scale. I mean, I could be way off, as the case is. But over here, approximately, you have what city? Ur of the Chaldeans. Where is Haran? All right, someone point it out for me. Excellent. Yes, good job. Haran is probably approximately up in this area. Where were they going? Yeah, very good, Josie. Right, nailed it. Yes. They're trying to go to the land of Canaan or Canaan, right? What are they doing up here? Did their GPS kind of mess them up or something? Maybe he flipped the map the wrong way and went up here instead of going across there. What happened, Kelly?
You don't want to go straight across.
Okay, why don't you want to go straight across?
You get pretty hot and tired.
Yeah, this is really kind of a desert area right here. And yet you have rivers. I'm not even going to try to draw the rivers. There's a couple rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates rivers, that help right here. What is this often referred to as? Anybody? Okay, Fertile Crescent. Because it's like a crescent and it has fertile land. They're really good with names. So instead of going straight across, they come up here on their way. They make it to Haran. They stop there. They settle. And that's as far as they get until chapter 12. Did I see a hand somewhere that I missed? Okay, so we get into chapter 12. And the Lord said to Abram, get up and go, literally, get up, go, from your country. Not just that, but from what? Your kindred, from your father's house to the land I will show you. Is that just God saying, hey, get up and leave? What does this mean? Get up and go from your country, from your father's house. What does that mean? What's that? To separate. Okay. I heard something over here. Okay, to leave your family. Yes. Mike, do you want to give more information on what you mean? I'm trying to figure out what you mean by to separate.
Well, he's going to take and make them a separate nation.
Okay. All right. Yeah, very good. When you typically think of the way that family structures work, Abraham is part of what?
Terah's family.
Yeah, Abraham is part of Terah's family at this point, right? I'm going to call him Abraham a lot. I know his name is Abram at this point. Just go with my anachronism. It's eventually going to be changed. We know that. But go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, we really don't understand this because each family dad in our culture is in charge of his unique nuclear family. But when I was in Iraq, I was meeting guys that had 100 kids. I was meeting guys that had and they were just one of 10 brothers themselves. And if you wanted to talk to the guy in the neighborhood that made things happen, there was one guy.
Yeah.
And he was in charge of that entire little suburb because it was his family.
Yes. Yeah, and it's really a compound idea. That it's more than just a house, but you have houses that are all around, and it's the father, the patriarch over all of them that kind of runs the show. And everyone belongs to that father. They're part of the father's house, and then eventually when he dies, one of the sons would kind of assume that same position. That's kind of the way that things would work. So when God says, hey, I know you're settled here, what I want you to do, though, is make a clean break. You no longer are going to be Abram, the son of Terah. You're now going to be Abram, the father of my people. I mean, it's more than just a change of location. This is severing himself from everything that he has ever identified himself with before. No longer is he going to hold any identity that he has ever held. Now, it's going to be completely changed to something else. He says, get up, sever yourself from anything and everything that you have ever known, and go where I tell you to go. This is crazy. But this is what Abram does. All right, we're going to start next week here in chapter 12, and we're going to talk about the promises that are given to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, and then from there kind of see how Abram's faith is conveyed in chapter 15, and if we get that far, although we probably won't, I think 15 is going to be probably, that's usually my stopping point anyway, is chapter 15 when I'm talking about Abram. But maybe have some conversation on chapter 22 as well. All right, are there any questions or comments from anybody before we close up this discussion and turn it over to Richard? All right, thanks a lot, guys.